Today on the show, Kevin is down bad for pics of Padme, so we're going to discuss temptation. Hello there, and welcome to The Lost Cantina, the podcast that explores the stories, characters, and themes behind our favorite Star Wars universe. I'm Jaden.
And I'm Kevin. Welcome, everyone. I think this is the first episode of The Lost Cantina.
Yes, after years of us begging, pleading, and crying and scheming, especially scheming, for our own Star Wars related podcast, we finally got it.
We did it, baby. We won. The war is over.
We did it by not by destroying what we hate, but by saving what we love.
There you go.
And that is the only sequel thing I will mention the rest of my life.
Well,
That's not
today
true.
on the show, we're going to talk about the concept of temptation, right? And we're going to talk about kind of how Star Wars uses temptation as a story element. It's a huge story element in Star Wars. And we're not just talking about TV shows or movies, we're talking video games and books and like all throughout Star Wars. Temptation is a huge story element for its heroes and for its villains. And it works every time. It's a constant thing that just we keep coming back to and it keep getting drawn back in, and it's really it's like a staple of Star Wars.
Absolutely. I mean, how many times do you think that in the writer's room they go, is it temptation? It's temptation. Yeah. Yeah.
It's always temptation. So this episode, we're going to talk about temptation, and we're going to talk about some of the dynamics of it, different types of temptation, and how Star Wars will tempt, if you will, Jedi and Sith, light and dark users together. We're going to talk about how a couple of them, we're going to give examples. We're going to pick a couple of characters, prominent characters you most likely will know about. And then we'll have a little bit of a discussion afterwards, kind of asking some questions about it and kind of how we feel about this story element.
But before we do that, we have a little bit of housekeeping we have to take care of. We love to hear from our listeners, so please email us at thelostcantinapod@gmail.com with your thoughts and episode ideas. You might see them in a future episode. Our teams also stream weekly on Twitch, so be sure to follow us on Twitch at twitch.tv/lore_party. And of course, you can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at The Lost Cantina.
And you can connect with both of us here. Jaden over here, you can connect with him at Mr. Jad J on Twitter and Instagram.
And you can connect with Kevin at KLoops on Instagram and In the Loop on Twitter.
So, okay, we're going to take a quick ad break, and then we're going to dive in. So stick around. All right, we are back. So first off, what is temptation, Jaden? We have to talk about what is the concept of temptation.
Oh, you're gonna make me be the fucking nerd and tell you the
No, I'll
definition?
do it. I'll do it.
I'll
I'll
do it. I'll do it. You're making me the nerd. That's fine. According to the Oxford Dictionary, hold on, I gotta do my voice. According to the Oxford Dictionary, temptation means the desire to do something, especially when wrong or unwise.
As well as a thing or course of action that attracts or, quote, tempts someone.
Some of these things are synonymous with desire, impulse, pull, seduction, inclination, or urge. Some of these things we use to get this podcast greenlit.
I feel like we've heard these words before in Star Wars a lot.
Yes, the pull to the dark side is the one I think is the one that people remember the most.
The desire or Anakin impulse, that kind of
Seduced
stuff.
by the dark side when he ceased to become Anakin Skywalker.
Yeah. So a lot of these we've heard here before. especially now in the dynamic of obviously Jedi and Sith, light dark users, we see both sides being tempted by something that or someone that leads them to the other side. And it's a great way to show that no matter what side of the argument that they're on, there seems to always be something tempting the other. Kind of like, the grass is always greener on the other side kind of thing.
Yeah. But before we start talking about both Jedi and Sith, there's a question you'd like to propose, right, Kevin?
Yes. Now, I was talking to Sarah about this, my wife, and she said, do you think that the Jedi and Sith, mostly Jedi, because we see them, the majority of them are Jedi that we see, but do you just think that the Jedi and Sith view the other side as tempting because that's what they're told, like, not to do? Is temptation to join the or light side, is that because of what the other has to offer, or is it just because they're told, that they shouldn't keep an open mind about the other side? Like the dark side is a path to things unnatural and you shouldn't do that and all these things. Like, is that why it's tempting because you're told not to do it? Or is it
Mm.
tempting because it genuinely is something that tempts you?
See, you bring up a very interesting point because we've seen a lot of Jedi being turned to the dark side, but not a lot of Jedi or Darksiders turning to the light and becoming a Jedi. There's several stories of of a Jedi who turns to the dark and then comes back to the light. Right? We've seen that.
Yep. Yep.
Kylo Ren. We've seen that with Darth Vader. We've seen that happen before, but we've never seen a pure dark side user or person who goes the other direction. And that would be very interesting to see. That might just be from the nature of we don't really see that many. There aren't as many Sith as there are Jedi in canon. You know,
True. True.
there
Yeah.
was a
Yeah.
lot in Legends, like Darth Revan is a great example of that. But again,
Oh yeah.
he was a Jedi that turned to the dark side, then came back. We don't see many pure Sith users who go back into the light. And that would be a very interesting thing to explore because there might be a Sith Lord out there who's like, I'm just tired of killing. I
Yeah.
would like to be someone who protects people for once.
Yeah. When we talk about our dark side users here, some of which you've mentioned, we are a little limited in who we can talk about because again, the storytelling of Star Wars is supposed to kind of showcase that the light side is necessarily the more in tune, or I don't want to say correct argument, but definitely the more relatable argument that you kind of morally feel like you want to be a part of, whereas the dark side is the one where it's kind of, I mean, it's called the dark side, it's not supposed to be like super like tempting for you as a story consumer, but like, so we don't see too many of that, but I think it would be a really cool story element to see, because it's like, hey, if the light side is so good, wouldn't you want to see somebody who is evil switch sides to the light side and not
Yeah.
somebody who fell, like an actual, like, I'm not, this is never going to happen, but like somehow Palpatine, turns to the light side, like that kind of shit, like
There are several Legends examples of like Darth Vader getting redeemed, for example,
yeah, yeah,
which
yeah.
that's a great comic strip. We don't really get to see the end of that, but that might have been interesting to see him go for and trying to redeem himself as a person. In
Yeah, yeah.
reality, he would have just been set up for war crimes trials. Let's be honest here.
Anakin and his war crimes.
While we don't see any Sith users who make that transition, we do see a lot of non Sith users who may, for example, the members of Inferno Squadron.
Hmm.
Well, 2 out of 3
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
make that jump from the dark side to the light. Serving the Empire to then serving for the Rebellion, and one of them was heavily influenced by Luke Skywalker when he went to go destroy the Palpatine's hidden storehouse, and he ran into Luke Skywalker, and the two of them had this transformative journey together. And Luke kind of showed him how to the ways that he could be a better person.
Now, the other thing, though, too, to take into account here is the Jedi and the Sith started off on the same team
Yes.
thousands and thousands of years ago. It was one group here. Don't forget that. We'll start with that. They were originally just Force users. That's who they were. And I guess you could say temptation split them apart.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the desire to explore the darker side of the Force will always be a huge motivator for someone who wants to acquire power for themselves. The Jedi like to believe that they are not in the game of seeking power and of control. But if you think about it, there's through their abilities, they are, ascending and obtaining greater power just through a more mindful way of thinking versus the Sith, who are they're very much the kids who cheated off their buddies' homework. They are just like smashing and grabbing power. They say that Yoda even says the dark side is not more powerful; it's just easier, more seductive. It's easier to use your anger. Anger is a universal emotion that is easy to tap into, whereas obtaining inner peace is not.
Yeah. So, speaking of inner peace, I guess we'll start off with the most notable of the group that we see being tempted, the Jedi. Or also, if you want to just throw in light side users, the Jedi, I think they have many things that tempt them. I'd say from saving loved ones to, like you said, power or just trying to win at all costs. And I think throughout the movies and TV shows, we see multiple Jedi being tempted. And I guess we'll start with a little list here of some notable Jedi that were tempted, what they were tempted for,
Yep.
what drew them to say, all right, let's change my eye color. I'm gonna get a full makeover, change the lightsaber. We're gonna full on makeover. It's a new
Gonna
me,
bleed our kyber crystals.
new year, new me.
So the most flawed Jedi by Jedi standards, I think that we can all agree would be Anakin Skywalker, the most un-Jedi of the Jedi. He started his training late. As from an early age, has been consumed by fear of loss. He always worried about losing his mother, then Padme, then Ahsoka, then Obi-Wan, then Padme again.
Yeah,
And that fear caused him to lose, well, all of them. We get to see throughout the Clone Wars just him come face to face with his own his fears and his belief that he from the second he was introduced into the order, he's been told you are the most powerful Jedi, you are, you're the chosen one, you're going to succeed. And I think that put a lot of pressure on him.
absolutely.
And I think that pressure aided in his un-Jedi like actions that we see him take during the Clone Wars.
I feel like it also added an ego, you know what I mean? Like, to
Yes,
be told you are
absolutely.
the best and the chosen one, you are special. Jedi are not supposed to be special. That's the whole point. You're not supposed to be special. You're
No, it's
supposed
not
to
about
be
you, it's about the good that the Order can provide to the
exactly.
galaxy.
Exactly. And being told that you are different than others, not necessarily in the context of, just everyone is special in their own way, that kind of stuff, but because he is a Jedi and he is supposed to be there to protect others for the greater good, being
Yep.
told that he is such a special person when he doesn't get his way, or if something is going a way he doesn't deem necessary or way he wants it's going to change things. He has to be correct because he's the special chosen one.
And we see this a lot in the Clone Wars. He takes kind of liberty with his position or title. He does things that are not very Jedi like. There's some times where he does not take prisoners. He
Mhm.
chooses to kill when no one's around.
Mhm.
During his fight with Obi-Wan, before he goes to see Padme, Obi-Wan tells him that his job is to defend, not kill. But Anakin sees a battle as winning or losing. His own ego and lust for power tempts him to win at all cost. And in
Yeah.
the end, we see it cost him his soul.
Yeah. So I'd say Anakin is definitely the
Poster child for failed Jedi schooling.
especially with the Obi-Wan TV show, when we see that fight before episode 2 begins, and we see the lesson that he's being taught by Obi-Wan about, winning isn't everything. Sometimes it's not about the battle. Sometimes it's about protecting other people.
Yep.
Sometimes it's about getting all these people to safety, and it's not about fighting this guy and beating him. Like mercy, he says in that fight, mercy is, like it's not gonna win. And Obi-Wan's like, bro, it's not about winning, dude.
It's
Like,
not about
chill.
winning.
So yeah, Anakin 100% poster child. Now, many people, I would say, view Obi-Wan as this all serious follower of the Jedi Code, right? However, he too had temptations that definitely would have led him astray, and I think have led him astray. You and I have had this conversation before, but Qui-Gon, when Qui-Gon was murdered by Darth Maul, and you see just how, like, the anger and frustration of not being able to help him
Yes.
set Obi-Wan off. I mean, we see him kind of trying to meditate like Qui-Gon. Like, Qui-Gon was chilling, right? Meditating while he was fighting Darth Maul when the ray shields were going by, right?
Yep.
We see Obi-Wan like constantly like energized, like frustrated he can't get through. He's giving in to his annoyance that he can't help, right? And then obviously when Qui-Gon dies, we see Obi-Wan kind of fighting differently. And that's because he is using his anger and frustration, his sadness, the loss of his master. He's using it to fight. He pulls off that move that we all know about. That if it was, if he was Anakin, he would have been dead. Like, that's the thing. Like, it worked because it wasn't expected, because he is a Jedi, and that's not necessarily like a move that a Jedi would do, to take those chances and do those things. But he was so pissed and wanted to win that he kind of gave into that. One would also say, when him like teaching Anakin that he is the chosen one, he was tempted by a prophecy. He was tempted by wanting to believe in the chosen one.
Yes, he was tempted by the belief that his master was not wrong. He
Yes.
held Qui-Gon Jinn up as a father figure and believed that, this was his master's dying wish, was that this boy should become a Jedi. But he never really asked whether or not Anakin should be the Jedi that everyone believed. Like, is this boy actually prophecy, or is he a problem?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we always, and I feel like what we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the other big temptation in his life, the Duchess Satine.
Yeah.
But I would like to hold this up as an example of him staying true to his Jedi code, because he was tempted, but he did not leave the order.
He was so
Now,
close to.
he does say if she had asked, he would have left the order. But that is a credit to Satine for knowing that that was not her place to ask that of him. She knew that she was part of the world of Mandalore and that he was part of the world of the Jedi. And I think that is, a credit to her as a character for saying the duty that we both have must take precedent over the desire that we have.
But now here's my question to you about that.
Yeah.
If she had wanted it, he would have done it. Do you think that it's just he was looking for an excuse not to?
No, I don't think so. I think it was a very true thing where I think he and her both had the same thought of, and it's very, it's one of the more beautiful and tragic stories of Star Wars, is that both of them wanted to be together, but they knew to do that, they would have to give up their positions. And they chose their positions over the love that they shared for one another.
Oh wait, you mean they didn't want to give up their power?
They didn't want to give up the not the power, they didn't want to give up the belief that they were doing what they were supposed to do.
Exactly.
I don't
Yep.
think power plays into it for those two characters specifically.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I only said that to try to like be a dick and like
Oh
trip
yeah.
you up and get you to say
No,
something
it's
else.
because
I
I
wanted to
really
know.
do think that, like, if Duchess Satine was, she was removed from her power and she was just
Yeah.
Satine, manager of Kinko's, she would manage the hell out of that Kinko's. because she would feel like that's what she had to do. Same with Obi-Wan. If Obi-Wan had to become a grizzled detective in New Orleans, he would be
What?
a grizzled detective in New Orleans
What? Kinko's and then a detective? What is happening?
because that's what they do. That's that they're like, this is my job. I'm going to do my job to the best of my abilities.
Was that what you think of Mandalore? You think it's a Kinko's?
Oh God, I mean, they share very similar qualities if you think about it. Lots of
Oh my
people in the building that don't want to be there, that don't really have a set goal or clear mission. They used to be somewhere else and now they're here.
god.
Nobody is at a Kinko's by choice. No one goes, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to head down to the Kinko's today.
Oh my god.
They are stuck there and they are miserable.
All right, so the last Jedi, I had to put this one in because he's been coming up a lot lately in more TV shows and comics and stuff. Like they're
Tales of the
really
Jedi was a big
yeah.
character development for him.
And I'm just gonna go by his more notable name that we all know, Count Dooku, um, also known as Darth Tyrannus, right?
Tyrannus, yes.
Yes.
Or Tyrannus if you're a weird British
Yeah.
person.
He was manipulated his entire life. So I will say this, like he was tempted, but it's one of those weird things where, you always say the nature versus nurture argument that we've talked about multiple times, like about clones and stuff. But it's also, if you think about it, the concept of nobody is ever born evil.
Unless you're a telemarketer, then you were born
Yeah.
evil.
I don't want to say that he was born evil, but I feel like from the beginning he was being raised and manipulated without even him knowing he was always going to be a pawn.
I agree. The title of Count is I don't know if it's changed from Legends, but in Legends that was a title that was hereditary, and he actually gave up being a count to become a Jedi. So there was already that temptation there. He was raised in high society and order, and then he was taken and given over to the Jedi Order. And then when he saw through what he believed was the lies of the Jedi and believed that the Jedi Order was the biggest, the Jedi Order and their bureaucracy was the biggest obstacle to true peace in the galaxy. He renounced his order and then became Count Dooku. And we see there, there was the temptation there. He's been surrounded by the temptations of wealth his entire life, and he gave that up to become a Jedi. And he then realized that it wasn't much better. And he realized that like the power that he gave up to obtain the power of the Jedi Order still didn't satisfy him, which is why he went and explored a darker art of the dark side. And you see that in a lot of media and with people in the real world where like they get power and then you go, why are you have $80 billion, Elon Musk? Why do you want $81 billion? And it's like, well, I want more power.
Let's be real here. He was very disillusioned by the Jedi Order. He did not like where it was going. He saw its flaws, which we all know he was not incorrect about many of the flaws of the current Jedi Order. But by seeing the flaws of his order, he then, instead of trying to, I would say he tried to fix some of the flaws, but because he felt stuck, instead of trying to work harder at fixing them, he just said, fuck it, I'm going to look elsewhere for strengths outside of it, which naturally just, led him to the dark side and then how that could be used. And I think his whole concept of structure and order, he wanted a more structured and ordered society because he came from that higher echelon of society, right? Where that was deemed as you should have that. Of course we need structure and order. That's the only way we could stay civilized. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
He also saw power, right, as a means of control. And coming from his past, power is how you control the masses. And like you said, money, I mean, even money, like rich, right? Being rich, you can control. That is power. Money is power, right? And when he looks at power, what is power in the force but the dark side? And so he's thought, okay, let me control the dark side of the force. I want it. I want to harness this power. And of course, it clouded his judgment and, the view of himself as now he is going to be the one to maintain order. it's like a domino effect of temptation. One thing tempts the next. I think he's a perfect example of how that works. Of how, well, if I committed one murder
Yeah.
and now I'm gonna go. It's okay. I can do it again, and then he just keeps doing it, and then continues to like seek more and more and more.
We should explore Count Dooku on a later episode, but I've always thought that Count Dooku embodies the energy of the phrase, "Oh man, he thinks he's the main character."
Yeah,
Because right up until Anakin gives him, slice off his freaking hands, he's thinking, "Oh man, I'm the main character of this story."
exactly. You're right. You really are right. I mean, he thought he was untouchable.
Yeah.
And the thing was, Palpatine made him that way. Palpatine pretty much like opened the door for him to have that mindset.
If you think about it, he was, for the 3 years of the Clone Wars, right up until his death, he was the second most powerful person in the galaxy.
Yeah.
He had the Separatist Alliance, like that was his. And it's kind of crazy, they almost. I've seen so many arguments on YouTube too, where it's like, what if the Separatists had just, or the Sith had just done the war, had just actually used the Separatists to try to crush the Republic? And I'm like, I mean, they weren't far off. Maybe that was like in the back of Palpatine's mind. That was like, hey, that's a plan B.
They would have won, in my opinion. I think they would have won.
They being the Republic.
No. I think the separatists had a really good chance.
They did without Palpatine sabotaging them at every fucking instance.
Well, here's the thing. Both sides, right? What were they fighting with? This is a side note, but what were they fighting with? Clones and droids the majority of the time. Not actual like armies, like their actual
Yeah,
armies.
their populaces were not deemed were not endangered by this war. Unless you're the Umbarans, then you're very endangered.
Yeah, then you're fucked. But that's the thing is like I think Palpatine manipulating everything, he was tempting everybody. Even the Jedi were tempted as a whole to maintain order, but that ends up leading them to maintain power. And so it was a way to manipulate the Jedi into thinking like, well, I'm a Jedi. I'm in charge, right? Like I'm a Jedi. And then that starts slowly planting the seeds of greed, the temptation of greed and power. Now, before we start getting into our other half of the Force, we're going to take a quick break.
And we're back. So we mentioned a lot about the Sith tempting the Jedi to fall to the dark side, but we need to talk about a lot of the Jedi on this list, their return to the light after falling into becoming a Sith Lord. You know, a lot of times the Sith are, consumed by the darkness. We look at like Count Dooku, he lived and died a Sith Lord. Like there was no redemption for him. He died as a Sith Lord. But there are some Jedi, like Darth Vader, he was tempted to join the light side again. And the themes that we're seeing with them, it seems to be a lot of, well, at least for Darth Vader, love, the love of his children. He was reminded that being a Jedi, uh, you can love and care for, and it doesn't lead to desperation. He's seeing that the kindness and hope and the strength in Luke when Luke stands up to Emperor Palpatine and says, "I am a Jedi like my father before him." That shows him that, hey, you can stand up and you can come back from the darkness at any time. And I think that's a lot of Jedi or a lot of Sith that are redeemed. They see that whatever you do, you can come back from as long as you believe that there is hope. I think hope is the biggest, like, I almost want to call it a Sith disinfectant. It's a Sith antiviral, which is hope.
Spray. It's like, no, get back, bottle of hope.
Take two and call me in the morning.
And I think that's what also drives Jedi to fall too, loss of hope. And when you get hope, then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, you mean there is hope out there. I can do it. I can save somebody and it's okay. I look at Luke too. after the prequels, after we've seen the prequel movies too, and now especially Clone Wars, is Anakin also saw not just himself in Luke, but he also saw Padme. Because what was Padme? That's what gets me is Padme was almost the embodiment of hope and love. And when Anakin lost those things, he also lost her. And
Yep.
so when he sees these qualities in his own children, it reminds him of what he lost and what he needs to regain. And especially for Anakin, I would say that that love and hope and care for others is what brought him back. 100%. Still the poster child for royal Jedi fuck ups, but still, he definitely came back.
Well, if you want to create a new empire, you got to break a few younglings, you know?
Yeah. Now, another person who is actually a dark side user originally, who very much gave our fun friends Anakin and Obi-Wan a lot of grief and was a disciple of Count Dooku, was Asajj Ventress.
And don't forget, Asajj was a Jedi herself once upon a time.
Corrupted, if you will, tempted
Yes.
by Count Dooku.
And she was corrupted by loss, actually, the loss of her master. She was raised as a slave, rescued by a Jedi, trained in the Jedi arts. Her master was killed in front of her, which led her to fall into despair because this was the person that raised her and kept her safe in her formative years. So she became an assassin. And that's when she was scooped up by Count Dooku, who took her on as her apprentice. And we see throughout the Clone Wars, you know, she's a bit of a mixed bag in terms of the victories that she has as Dooku's apprentice.
Yeah.
More L's than W's is she eating.
She definitely struggles a bit, and I honestly think that the L's help fuel her rage.
Yes, until Palpatine himself sees her as a challenge to his authority and orders Dooku to do away with her, which Dooku complies with because Dooku is Palpatine's little bitch boy. And she survives the assassination attempt, thankfully. But that leads her to she was kind of forced out of the dark side, to be honest. It wasn't really her choice to leave. It was more of just her being like, well, guess I'm not allowed in that clubhouse anymore.
Yeah, but also she does end up falling in love.
That's true. She falls in love with one Quinlan Voss.
Yes, a
Uh,
Jedi.
I hold him up as there's a little club that I love to talk about with George Lucas, and it's the Jedi that George Lucas can't seem to want to kill club.
Yeah, the dude's a badass. He's like Anakin Skywalker badass.
It's Quinlan Voss, right? It's Shak T. I now say Ahsoka Tano. I know that wasn't George Lucas's fault. It's more Dave Filoni, but like it's sins of the father. Because I mean, I don't know if you know. There's a side note about Shak T. Shak T died about 12 times in the Revenge of the Sith before George Lucas decided, I'll do it off screen. But yeah, getting back to Asajj Ventress, she kind of after leaving Dooku's service, she kind of you see a bit of a redemption from her because she kind of realizes, hey man, I'm hard, but I'm not that hard.
That's what she
you
said.
Yes. She gets to explore like the kinder, gentler side of herself that she never really allowed herself to explore ever since the day her master was killed in front of her. You know, we see her, she becomes a bounty hunter, befriends little Boba Fett, starts making friends with other bounty hunters, and she eventually, starts to realize that she can be something besides a killer.
And I would say she doesn't necessarily 100% renounce her Sith ways, but is somebody who is no longer consumed by it. Yet again, she is tempted by the love and friendship of others and realization that power is not everything. Now, the last one I wrote because I found it very interesting because it was one person that everybody loves to talk about constantly who has tempted Obi-Wan multiple times and is I think is one of the most interesting characters in Star Wars. And that's Maul, Darth Maul.
Yes.
We all know the story of Darth Maul. He was Palpatine's apprentice, got his shit rocked, and then kind of started going off on his own after he was abandoned by Palpatine. Easy way to put it right there. But then he wants to still gain power, right? He still is consumed by the want for revenge and the want for power.
I want to real quick. I want to touch on when you said that he was abandoned by Palpatine because you're not wrong. You know, Palpatine goes out of his way to Mandalore to like kick his shit
Yep.
in and kill his brother, and then keeps him in a facility and is like torturing him, and then the Mandalorians break him back out, and Palpatine just kind of goes, "Eh, that'll sort itself out, I assume."
Yeah. Yeah.
He doesn't even try to recapture him. He just goes, "I'm not. I'm done with you. I'm busy. I'm busy over here."
Well, when I say abandoned as well, I also mean like, you're done, kid. Like, I'm over your shit. And then,
To be fair, the first time he was abandoned by Palpatine, after he was presumed dead on
yep.
Naboo, he was just kind of like, I mean, dude got cut in half. There's no way he's alive, right? Narrator, he was. Because Star Wars.
Because Star Wars, science, because they had a really good healthcare system.
Well, I was always say the man was too angry to
Yeah, he
die.
really was.
That's literally that was the explanation they gave us. And I'm like, all right, Dave, that's fine. You wanted Darth Maul in. Every man, woman, and child, upon seeing Darth Maul in Episode 1, said, "Man, I wish we got more of that guy." And they said, "I have granted your wish."
And then you just hear Darth Maul screaming, Filoni!
Yeah. And then he said, "Any more requests?" And they said, "No more Martinez sisters." And he said, "No." You will get another episode of them in Bad Batch, and you will like it.
So when it comes to Maul, Maul ends up becoming the ruler of Mandalore. And just like Obi-Wan, which I find to be hilarious, the man he's trying to get revenge on, he starts having a really nice relationship with Duchess Satine.
I don't know if nice is the way I would describe it, but sure.
Well, we'll say nice relationship in terms of it makes him he has a connection with her, and it makes him start thinking a little bit differently than he did before. He's not really a Sith, but like he's still a dark side user, right? Kind of like how Ahsoka leaves the Jedi, but she's still a light side user. And after forming this connection with her, he kind of begins to question his own goals and even his past. He starts like kind of reviewing himself. So much so that he does contemplate an alliance with the Jedi Order. And in his way, he kind of sees it as like, okay, for the sake of justice and peace. And it's like, wait a minute, hold the fuck on. I find that a character so angry he won't die and so filled with rage and revenge for not just Obi-Wan, but then eventually Palpatine could just all of a sudden for a girl, another girl that he has met that is also the bae of his sworn person he's gonna get revenge on. He's like, yeah, maybe I should partner with these guys. Maybe that might be the right idea. Yeah, yeah. What? I find it to be just so out of left field that it works. And even when he dies, right? Even when Maul dies, it's not even him necessarily being a Sith or even super dark side user anymore. The dance he has, I will say it, the dance
Yep.
he has with Obi-Wan is completely different than what it was the years prior. Even when he dies, he's not consumed by hatred, rage, or even revenge. He's like literally at peace,
Yeah.
being
I
held by the
His
one he
suffering is over.
his suffering's over. He's being held by the one that he swore revenge on for basically almost the entirety of his life.
Yep. And he realized that he failed, but then
Yeah.
I think the wheels started turning at the end for him, which is why he says, the one you're protecting, is he the chosen one? And Obi-Wan says, yes, until Disney says no.
Yeah.
And then he says, fuck, and then he dies, and then the rest of us die too.
Well, think about it though. When he's being held, what does Obi-Wan give him? He gives him hope.
Yeah. He gives him hope that everything that is happening is going to be worth it.
He gives him hope, and that is, I want to say, that was the moment when the true moment when Maul was like at peace, and I want to say one with the Force, if you will, because he no long. I think he let go of all of his anger and hatred
Yep.
right then and there. So I have questions for you, Jaden. I have many questions for you about this. Now that we've gone over all of this,
Mhm.
do you think that the Jedi are more prone to temptation, or is it just because, for instance, I will say Jedi, we'll say Jedi now, but do
Yeah.
you think the Jedi are more prone to temptation, or is it just because we follow Jedi stories more?
So this was a very interesting question when you posed it in our discussions before the show, because honestly, I'm very interested to see what the new show Star Wars Acolyte is going to be like, because that one
Yeah.
is from a Sith perspective.
Yeah.
So this question might get answered in that, in terms of like how easy is it for Sith to fall to the temptation of the light side. It'd be very easy for me to say, oh no, that we've only ever seen it from the Jedi side. That's why. But you've got to remember, Yoda himself in episode 5 says the dark side is easier, more seductive. So I think when you think about that, it's if the path to power is easier to go to the dark side, it's the Jedi are probably naturally more easily swayed than the dark side is.
Hmm. Do you think the Jedi are more swayed, or are at least more easily swayed, because they are constantly told no? Because the Sith are not necessarily told no, don't use the light side. They're not necessarily told that. They're just told that, well, our side's better because it's more powerful. Like duh, power. Don't Isn't that what you want? Do you think that the Jedi are more easily swayed because they are? It is so taboo to them that it's even more tempting.
Actually, no. I think that the nature of the dark side being the easier path is what tempts people. I think
Okay.
necessarily, not necessarily saying just being like, don't do it, you naughty boys, don't do it. That's not really that makes the Jedi shallow and dumb, and I don't think that's what they are. I know there are people out there who there's a lot of Jedi hate out there,
Oh yeah.
but I don't think that necessarily is the end all be all. I think that the Jedi Order, the morals that it subscribed to, are the more difficult path, and I think that in and of itself is a challenge to a lot of people. No one out there can say that they're a wholly good person. That's what people strive to be, is a better person, and that's a hard thing to do. To be a good person all the time is a hard thing to do. And I think that, the Jedi saying yes, but it's worth it if you put in the work.
So I counter that with, I think it's easier to be a good person than it is to be a bad person. I see now, in terms of the Force, obviously, yes, the dark side is easier to give into. But I actually genuinely think to be I know this sounds so stupid, but it is. I think it's easier to be nice to people, for instance, than it is to be a hateful piece of shit. Because that can be being hateful and stuff is just so exhausting. If anything, the dark side and being angry and hateful, I think Palpatine turning into the gremlin he becomes really, we gave him water uh after midnight or whatever, after dark. I just think like he that does it genuinely changes you. Hatefulness and all that stuff, it takes its toll on people. Look at people who are hateful in the world, and they look like fucking garbage. because they're just the hatefulness comes out.
And then you look at guys like Paul Rudd, and they just have a beautiful, soft complexion after 55 years on this earth.
Yes. But I think it may be a contributing factor. Like, being taboo is definitely a contributing factor of, like, it is being told it's tempting is one thing that I think in the psychological sense would make somebody think that. But yeah, I definitely would like to explore this question more throughout, just more discussions in general, because especially with the new show coming out, it's gonna be very interesting to see. Now, my other question for you is, do you think love, or we'll say hope, we'll throw that in there, and the connection to others, do you think that that is the true temptation that can sway both sides? Because in the examples we gave, those are the contributing factors to why people are switching sides, or at least being tempted to switch sides. Now, whether it be, I have love for Padme, I'm going to do everything I can to protect her, and then that's the temptation, and then it kind of, goes off the rails from there. But then also, well, I also have love for Padme, and look at my child, and oh my god, what have I done? It swaps me back to wanting to protect those people, and I was wrong, and I can care for them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think hope is the one. I kind of mentioned and alluded to this earlier in the podcast, but I think hope is the biggest pendulum that can swing someone one way or the other. You see even in our own world, if a city has no hope, they'll surrender a lot faster than a city who believes relief is coming.
Yeah.
And I think that the lack of hope or the lack of faith in the light side is what churns a lot of people to the dark side. You see that with the Saz Ventress, the hope and the life that her master gives her, and then when he's taken from her, it takes away her hope and takes away her love. And I think that takes her down. And I think that,
Yeah.
that's a great way to look at just both sides have equal measure in hope. The Jedi use it as a source of strength, whereas the Sith use its absence as a source of strength.
I would agree with that. I think hope, and I will throw love in there, because I think when it comes to love, there's also hope in there. I think they kind of go together. When you have hope to protect your friends, it's because you love your friends. Or when you have hope to protect your city, it's because you love your city. You know what I mean? I throw them in together. I think they're a pair, just like the yin and yang, dark and light side. I find hope and love to be a pair that can draw you to, or tempt you to, both sides. So, final thoughts on temptation, Jaden. I'm curious, what do you think? Do you think that temptation is definitely a big storytelling element in Star Wars?
Absolutely. Otherwise, I don't know what we were just recording the last hour and a
There
half.
you go. Yeah, my final thoughts are definitely like temptation. They do it so well. These writers are really, really good. Pay them more. Um, as the writer strike is going on. Yeah, the temptation is definitely, I think, what is natural for a lot of people. Um, in the real world, it's a natural storytelling element, and I think it makes us human. We're tempted by things every single day, and not necessarily. I'm not talking about killing younglings, or invading the capital or anything like that. Um, but temptation is there, and I think that's for storytelling. I think that's one of the things that make us human, is storytelling, and I think that really makes sense to use one of the most important and most viable things that we see every day. And what are we tempted by ourselves? Love and hope. So I would agree with you on that. Well, that about wraps it up. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please take a second to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It really helps grow the show. And be sure to connect with us on Instagram at The Lost Cantina Pod, and Twitter at The Lost Cantina. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.